The man standing in my driveway wasn't looking at the shattered cardboard boxes scattered across the grass. He wasn't looking at the clothes hanging over the fence or the framed photographs lying face down in the dirt. He wasn't even looking at the 6 people who had taken over my front porch, as if they had owned it their entire lives. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Carter." I nodded, still holding the old coffee mug my late father had given me on my 25th birthday. It had somehow survived being thrown from the second-floor bedroom window. "Yes." He extended his hand. "My name is David Lawson. I'm with Harrison and Cole. Your attorney asked me to bring these documents personally because he believed timing would matter." Timing. At that moment, my former mother-in-law, Linda Brooks, laughed loudly enough for everyone in the yard to hear. "Oh look," she said, folding her arms with theatrical amusement. "Now he's hiring people to watch us take out the trash." The trash. She meant my belongings. She meant the 47 years of my life packed into torn boxes and scattered across wet grass. She smiled at me exactly the way she had smiled 6 months earlier inside the courthouse after my divorce became official. The smile of someone completely certain she had won. But this story doesn't start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 47 years old. For 23 years, I worked as a structural engineer, specializing in bridge restoration projects across 3 states. Most people never notice bridges until something goes wrong. That suited me perfectly. By the time I turned 45, I had supervised the rehabilitation of 38 agging bridges, managed construction budgets exceeding $92 million, and built a reputation that contractors trusted more than expensive advertising campaigns. Numbers made sense. Steel either carried the weight, or it didn't. Concrete either cracked, or it held. People were never that simple. Growing up, I learned very early that my family believed the loudest person in the room deserved the most attention. I wasn't loud. My younger brother Daniel could tell a story before he could ride a bicycle. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 new friends. I preferred sitting beside my grandfather while he repaired old tools inside his garage. He used to say something I didn't understand until much later. Strong things rarely announce themselves. When I was 11 years old, our elementary school held a science fair. Daniel built a volcano that exploded bright red foam across half the cafeteria. Parents applauded. Teachers laughed. Everyone crowded around his table. I built a suspension bridge from balsa wood. It held 112 pounds before finally breaking. The judge quietly handed me first place. Almost nobody noticed. On the drive home, my mother smiled proudly at Daniel. "Everyone loved your volcano." Then she looked at me. "Your project was nice too." Nice. That word followed me for decades. Nice employee. Nice husband. Nice neighbor. Nice didn't attract attention. It simply carried weight quietly. When I met my future wife, Emily Brooks, I was 29. She was 27. She laughed easily. She volunteered every Saturday at the public library. She remembered birthdays without writing them down. She loved old bookstores and rainy afternoons. She also came from a family completely opposite mine. The Brooks family celebrated everything loudly. Birthdays became weekend events. Sunday dinners required 20 people. Arguments happened at full volume. Apologies happened with expensive desserts. At first I admired it. It felt warm, alive, different. Linda Brooks especially welcomed me. Or at least I believed she did. Looking back now, I realized she wasn't welcoming me. She was evaluating me. Linda judged people according to visibility. Doctors ranked high. Lawyers ranked higher. Business owners ranked even higher. Quiet professionals. People who spent weeks solving problems nobody else understood. she considered invisible. At our engagement dinner, she smiled politely after asking about my career. So, you inspect bridges? I design restoration plans. So, she nodded. So basically maintenance. Emily corrected her immediately. He leads restoration projects. Linda waved her hand. Same difference. I laughed. It seemed harmless. Over the years, I learned something about Linda. She never insulted directly. She minimized. She reduced. She translated accomplishments into ordinary language until they sounded insignificant. If someone earned a doctorate, she called them a student. If someone owned a company, she called them lucky. If someone worked quietly, she assumed they lacked ambition. That worldview shaped every conversation she had. Emily understood it better than anyone. Mom believes success only counts if strangers recognize your face. I should have listened more carefully. The first 10 years of our marriage were genuinely happy. We bought an empty piece of land outside Cedar Ridge for $98,000. Everyone told us we were overpaying. The property had an abandoned farmhouse beyond repair. Poor drainage. Overgrown trees. No attractive landscaping. What everyone ignored was the foundation. Solid. Perfectly positioned. I spent almost 3 years designing our future home during evenings after work. Every room had a reason. Every window captured morning sunlight. The workshop faced north because temperature stayed more stable. The kitchen overlooked the maple trees Emily loved. I didn't hire expensive architects. I became my own project manager. Weekends meant measuring, pouring, checking, building. Friends volunteered. Co-workers helped install beams. My father spent 6 consecutive Saturdays teaching me cabinet finishing techniques he'd learned 40 years earlier. When the house was finally complete, 186 days behind schedule, but almost $200,000 under comparable construction costs, I stood alone in the driveway after everyone left. Emily walked beside me. She slipped her hand into mine. You built this. I shook my head. We built it. She smiled. No. She looked at every wall carefully. You dreamed it first. Those words stayed with me. For years. Maybe because nobody had ever said anything like that before. Our marriage slowly changed after Emily accepted a marketing position at a rapidly growing technology company. The promotion doubled her salary within 4 years. I celebrated every success. Honestly, I was proud of her. But success also changed the people surrounding her. Networking dinners replaced quiet evenings. Weekend conferences replaced hiking trips. Conversations became filled with words like branding, visibility, image, perception. Things impossible to calculate. Linda loved every minute. My daughter finally married up. She said it jokingly. At least everyone pretended it was a joke. Emily never laughed. Neither did I. Then came the first sentence I couldn't forget. We were hosting Thanksgiving. 24 relatives crowded our dining room. Someone asked who had chosen the house design. Emily smiled. Michael designed almost everything. Before anyone else spoke. Linda laughed softly. Well, he had plenty of free time. The room chuckled politely. Nobody intended cruelty. That almost made it worse. Because nobody questioned it. Nobody asked about the 60-hour workweeks. The night inspections. The emergency bridge closures. The years required to finance every brick surrounding us. One sentence erased all of it. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. She knew. I simply smiled. That became my habit. Smile. Change the subject. Move forward. Looking back, maybe silence teaches people they can continue. The divorce itself wasn't explosive. No betrayals. No affair. Just distance growing quietly until it occupied every room. Marriage counseling lasted 11 months. 22 sessions. Hundreds of honest conversations. We eventually admitted something painful. We had become excellent roommates. Poor partners. The judge finalized everything in 23 minutes. Emily cried afterward. So did I. Some endings aren't caused by hatred. Some are caused by two people slowly becoming strangers. We agreed to divide our financial accounts equally. Retirement savings, vehicles, investments, everything followed mediation agreements. One thing remained separate. The house, because legally, it had always been mine. I purchased the land before marriage. Construction loans remained under my name. Every payment originated from accounts documented years before our wedding. Emily never challenged that. She understood why. She signed every document willingly. "I don't want your house, Michael." Those were her exact words. "I just want a different life." I believed her. She moved into an apartment downtown. We remained respectful, occasionally texting about mail, tax documents, shared memories. Nothing dramatic. Then Linda entered the picture. Emily accepted a 12-month international assignment in Singapore. She left 6 weeks after the divorce. Linda insisted on helping organize Emily's remaining belongings. Instead, she began organizing my future. Without asking. Without permission. Without warnings. The first time Linda suggested it, she acted as though she were doing me a favor. "You don't need a house this large anymore, Michael." She stood in my kitchen with a cup of tea I had made for her, looking around as if she were inspecting a property for sale. "One man doesn't need 4 bedrooms. I smiled politely. "I've lived here for almost 16 years. She shrugged. "Exactly time for something smaller. I like it here." "You like routines." There was a difference. She never understood it. For her, staying in one place meant fear of change. For me, it meant building something worth keeping. After that conversation, she began mentioning the house almost every time we met. "You could sell it. You'd make a fortune. You could finally travel. You could buy a luxury apartment." Each suggestion sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed a campaign. I always answered the same way. "I'm not selling." 3 months later, she stopped asking. I should have realized that wasn't acceptance. It was preparation. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was inspecting a steel truss bridge 20 miles outside town. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, rarely called. She was 74 years old and only used her cell phone for emergencies. "Michael." "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you." Her voice sounded uncertain. "There are people at your house." "What do you mean?" "Moving trucks." I frowned. "Moving trucks." "2 of them." She hesitated. "And your former mother-in-law is giving instructions." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the sentence made no sense. "Maybe she's helping someone else." "No." Another pause. "They're carrying furniture inside your house." The steel measuring tape slipped from my hand. "What?" "I thought perhaps you knew." "I don't." I thanked her, climbed into my truck, and drove home faster than I had driven in years. The entire drive lasted 52 minutes. It felt like 5 hours. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding. A storage issue. Anything. When I turned onto my street, the explanation disappeared. 2 moving trucks stood in my driveway. The garage door was open. Boxes filled my front hallway. Children ran across my lawn. Linda stood on my porch holding a clipboard. A clipboard. As if she were supervising a construction project. She smiled the moment she saw me. Oh, good. She didn't sound surprised. We were wondering when you'd be home. I walked toward her slowly. What is this? My new beginnings. No. I looked past her into the house. What is this? My lease ended. She answered as though that explained everything. My son Kevin needed somewhere to stay. Kevin, 42 years old. Recently unemployed. Recently divorced. Recently convinced every setback was someone else's fault. Behind him walked his girlfriend Melissa, carrying decorative pillows into my living room. Their teenage son carried a television. Linda pointed toward them proudly. They'll use the downstairs. I stared at her. Youth. Your upstairs has plenty of room. I honestly thought she was joking. I waited for the smile. Instead, she looked confused. Michael, you can't move into my house. She sighed dramatically. There you go again. There I go again, what? Being difficult. I actually looked around to see whether hidden cameras were recording some kind of social experiment. Linda. I spoke as calmly as possible. This is my house. She nodded. We know. So everyone needs to leave. Her expression changed. Not to anger. To disappointment. Like a teacher correcting a slow student. You've always struggled with sharing. Sharing. I had spent 16 years paying every mortgage payment. Every property tax. Every insurance bill. Every roof repair. Every plumbing emergency. Sharing. Kevin walked onto the porch carrying one of my fishing rods. Mom, he interrupted casually. Where should I put these? Linda barely glanced at him. Garage. He nodded. I stepped forward. Put that back. Kevin stopped. What? That's mine. He rolled his eyes. We're family. No, I answered. My former wife was family. You aren't. Silence settled over the porch. Then Linda laughed. You hear that? She looked toward Melissa. This is exactly why Emily left him. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because I believed it. Because she used Emily's name as a weapon. I looked directly at her. Emily never said that. Linda folded her arms. She didn't have to. I walked into my own house. Or tried to. Kevin blocked the doorway. Hold on. I'm going inside. We're still unpacking. I blinked. You are standing between me and my own front door. He shrugged. Give us 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I had designed that doorway. Measured that frame. Installed those hinges with my own hands. Now another man was telling me to wait outside. Mrs. Henderson watched nervously from across the street. Another neighbor slowed his car. People noticed. Embarrassment has a strange quality. It makes ordinary moments feel public. I stepped backward. Pulled out my phone. Called Emily. Straight to voicemail. I left a short message. Your mother is moving people into my house. Please call me. 10 minutes later she called back. Her voice sounded exhausted. What happened? I explained everything. Silence. Long silence. Finally. What? My mother did what? I repeated it. She apologized 3 times before I finished. I never authorized that. I know. I'll call her. Please. 20 minutes later Emily called again. I'm sorry. What did she say? Emily inhaled deeply. She said the house should belong to the family. It does. No. Another pause. I mean, she believes since we lived there together, it morally belongs to everyone. I laughed once. A tired laugh. Morally. I know. No. I corrected gently. You know your mother. Emily didn't defend her. Not once. I'll book the first flight home if necessary. You don't have to. Michael. I'll handle it. I truly believed I could. I still believed reason mattered. The next morning I arrived with copies of my deed, mortgage release, tax records and identification. Paper. Objective. Clear. I thought facts ended arguments. Instead, they began new ones. Linda glanced at the documents for less than 5 seconds. I'm not interested. You should be. I don't need paperwork. She smiled confidently. I have common sense. I placed the deed on the dining table. It's my name. I pointed. Only mine. Kevin looked. Melissa looked. Linda didn't. Paper isn't everything. No, I agreed quietly. But ownership is. Kevin leaned back in his chair. We've already changed the bedrooms. I stared. You what? My son likes the room facing east. I walked upstairs. My bedroom door stood open. Half my clothes were gone. Family photographs had disappeared. The bookshelf my father built. Empty. Guest rooms contained unfamiliar furniture. Children's toys covered the hallway. Every room reflected someone else's choices. Not mine. I walked downstairs again. Where are my things? Linda answered without looking up from her coffee. Storage. What storage? The garage. The garage. Where temperatures reached over 100 degrees every summer. Where moisture damaged photographs. Where mice found cardboard boxes. I opened the garage. My belongings weren't organized. They were piled. Carelessly. Boxes upside down. Picture frames leaning against lawn equipment. My father's toolbox under bags of clothes. Something inside me shifted. Not exploded. Shifted. Like a bridge carrying one load too many. Still standing. But permanently altered. I called my attorney that afternoon. His name was Richard Hall. I'd hired him during the divorce because friends described him with one sentence. He never raises his voice. They were right. Richard listened for almost 15 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. Do they have permission to live there? No. Written. No. Verbal. No. Another pause. Have you ever represented that they own the property? Never. Good. His voice remained calm. Don't argue with them anymore. So what do I do? Go stay somewhere else tonight. I frowned. In my own situation. For one night. He answered gently. Sometimes patience is faster than anger. I didn't fully understand what he meant. I would the following evening. I spent that night in a modest hotel, less than 8 miles from the house I had spent 16 years building. The room cost $118. It had beige walls, a window facing the parking lot, and a coffee maker that rattled louder than it brewed. I barely slept. Not because the bed was uncomfortable. Because every time I closed my eyes, I pictured strangers walking through my workshop. Opening cabinets my father had helped me build. Sitting in the living room where Emily and I had celebrated every Christmas. There are places that become part of your memory so completely that losing access to them feels like forgetting your own name. Around 2 in the morning my phone buzzed. It was Emily. I can't sleep. Neither can I. I talked to Mom again. And a long silence. She thinks she's protecting the family. I closed my eyes. From what? From uncertainty. That answer surprised me. Emily continued quietly. My brother has nowhere stable to live. I know. Melissa lost her job. I know. My mother believes if everyone stays together, they'll eventually recover. I understood that. Really, I did. Helping family isn't wrong. Taking someone else's home without permission is. They never asked. I know. They decided. I know. She sounded genuinely ashamed. I'm sorry, Michael. So am I. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. Finally, she whispered something I hadn't expected. My mother has always confused love with control. That sentence explained more than 20 years of family dinners. The following morning, Richard Hall called exactly at 8:03. I've prepared everything. What happens now? We begin formally. Will this take months? No. His answer came so quickly that I stopped walking. It won't. Why? Because your case isn't complicated. He spoke with the confidence of someone discussing mathematics. Ownership is documented. Occupancy is unauthorized. There are witnesses. There is no lease. There is no agreement. Legally, this is far simpler than they imagine. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So what do you need from me? Meet me at 3:30. At the house? Yes. And Michael's? Yes. Don't say more than necessary. At 3:27, I parked across the street. Mrs. Henderson was watering flowers. She waved gently. I'm praying for you. I smiled. Thank you. The front yard looked even worse than it had the day before. Maury toys. Maury vehicles. Someone had hung wind chimes from the porch. Another person had placed flower pots beside the front steps. They weren't settling in. They believed they had already settled. Richard arrived 3 minutes later. Grey suit. Black briefcase. Calm expression. He shook my hand once. You ready? As ready as I can be. He nodded. Good. We walked toward the front door together. Linda opened it before we knocked. She looked delighted. Though, she smiled. You actually hired a lawyer. Richard returned a polite smile. Good afternoon. I'm Richard Hall. I represent Michael Carter. Linda laughed. Well, this should be entertaining. Kevin appeared behind her carrying a soda. Melissa stood in the hallway. 2 teenagers watched from the staircase. Nobody looked worried. Richard didn't raise his voice. May we come in? Linda hesitated, then stepped aside dramatically. Of course. The living room hardly looked familiar anymore. Different furniture. Different decorations. Even the photographs on the shelves had changed. It looked like someone had tried to erase 16 years in 48 hours. Richard remained standing. He opened his briefcase carefully, removed a single folder, then looked directly at Linda. I'll keep this brief. She folded her arms confidently. I'm listening. My client is the sole legal owner of this property. We know what he claims. Richard ignored the interruption. There is no lease. There has never been permission for permanent occupancy. You and everyone residing here are unauthorized occupants. Kevin laughed. You make it sound dramatic. Richard calmly continued. My client has chosen not to pursue several legal remedies available to him. Linda smiled. How generous. He has instead authorized immediate service of this notice. Richard handed her one document. Just one. She accepted it with the same confidence she'd shown all week. She glanced at the first page, smiled, then continued reading. The smile disappeared. She read slower, much slower. Kevin noticed. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Melissa leaned closer. Linda reached the final page. Looked up at Richard. "This isn't possible." "It is." "No." She shook her head. "This house belonged to Emily too." "It did not." Richard answered without emotion. "The divorce settlement specifically confirms otherwise." Linda looked at me for the first time without certainty. "You lied." "I never lied." "You let us move in." "No, I never agreed." Kevin grabbed the document. He scanned several paragraphs. His confidence vanished almost instantly. "What does this mean?" Richard answered him. "It means every occupant must vacate the property immediately. And if we don't..." Richard closed his briefcase. "My client will request immediate enforcement." He paused just long enough for every word to settle. And given the documentation attached to the notice, he looked around the room. "There is virtually no legal basis upon which you could remain." The room became completely silent. No shouting. No dramatic music. Just silence. The kind that arrives when reality finally catches up with belief. Linda looked at me. "You would actually do this?" I answered honestly. "I asked you to leave before you unpacked. You could have worked something out." I asked. "You didn't try hard enough." I almost smiled. "No, Linda. I tried exactly once. That should have been enough." She looked around the room as though expecting someone to defend her. Nobody spoke. Kevin read the document again. His face had gone pale. Melissa quietly picked up her purse. One of the teenagers whispered, "Dad." Kevin didn't answer. Richard checked his watch. "My client is prepared to allow you until sunset to remove your belongings peacefully." Linda stared. "Sunset?" "Yes. You can't expect us to move that fast." Richard replied with the same steady tone. "My client didn't expect you to move in this fast." No one had an answer to that. Not one. For nearly a full minute, no one moved. It was strange. 48 hours earlier, the house had been filled with constant motion. Boxes carried upstairs. Furniture dragged across hardwood floors. Children running through hallways. Linda giving instructions as though she had spent years preparing for this moment. Now, silence. The kind of silence that forces people to hear their own thoughts. Kevin finally cleared his throat. "There has to be another option." Richard looked at him respectfully. "If there is, you're welcome to propose one." Kevin looked toward Linda. She didn't answer. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed unsure of herself. Not frightened. Just out of certainty. She had spent years believing confidence alone could change reality. Unfortunately for her, reality had arrived in a man carrying one folder. Melissa spoke quietly. "Kevin." He turned. "We should start packing." He frowned. "Already?" She nodded toward the papers. "I don't think he's bluffing." Richard wasn't. Neither was I. The first box came down the stairs less than 10 minutes later. It wasn't mine. It belonged to Kevin. Then another. Then another. The same moving company that had happily unloaded everything 2 days earlier returned after receiving an urgent phone call. The driver stepped out of the truck, looked at the house, then looked at me. "I thought we just moved everybody in." I smiled politely. So did I. He didn't ask another question. Professional movers learn quickly when not to become involved in family disputes. I stayed outside most of the afternoon. Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't bear watching strangers remove their lives from rooms that still didn't feel like mine. Mrs. Henderson walked across the street carrying 2 bottles of water. She handed me one. "You okay?" "I think so." She looked toward the house. "I've lived here 31 years. I nodded. "I know. I've watched you build every inch of that place." Her eyes became slightly watery. "When they threw your father's toolbox into the garage." She shook her head. I wanted to say something. "You already helped." "I only called." "You called." I smiled. That mattered. Sometimes people underestimate the value of witnesses. Truth becomes stronger when someone else quietly sees it. Around 5 o'clock, Emily called again. "I just landed." "Already?" "I took the first flight I could." "You didn't have to." "I know." She hesitated. "Are they leaving?" "Yes." Another long silence. "I'm relieved." "So am I." I don't think my mother understood what she'd done. I looked toward the front porch, where Linda stood directing movers with far less confidence than before. She understood what she wanted. Emily answered softly. "That's not always the same thing." "No, it isn't." As the afternoon stretched toward evening, each member of Linda's family reacted differently. Kevin became quieter with every passing hour. The anger disappeared first. Then the excuses. Finally, only embarrassment remained. Twice he walked toward me as though intending to apologize. Twice he turned around before saying anything. Melissa apologized instead. She approached while carrying 2 storage bins. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." I knew this felt wrong. She looked down. "But Kevin said your divorce was different." "He said everyone agreed." I nodded slowly. "I understand." "No." She shook her head. "I should have asked." She extended her hand. "I'm sorry." I shook it. "I hope things get better for you." "I hope so too." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only exhaustion. The teenagers surprised me most. Before leaving, the older one walked back onto the porch. "I liked your workshop." I looked at him. "You went inside." He nodded. There were drawings everywhere. There still are. I want to build things someday. For the first time all day. I smiled genuinely. Then start with small projects. He grinned. "My grandfather said that." "So did mine." He nodded once. Then climbed into the truck without another word. Children often leave conversations carrying lessons adults overlook. Linda remained until almost sunset. She insisted on supervising every final box. Every chair. Every suitcase. When the last truck door closed, she stood at the bottom of the porch steps looking directly at me. "You've made your point." I answered quietly. This was never about making a point. It was about winning. "No." I shook my head. "It was about coming home." She looked around the property. "You'll be alone here." "I've been alone before." "That's a sad way to live." I considered that for a moment. Then answered honestly. "Being alone and having peace are not the same thing." She didn't reply. Instead, she glanced at the front door. "I thought this house represented family." "It does." She frowned. "Then why keep us out?" "Because family isn't something people declare." I looked at the yard where my belongings had been thrown only the day before. "It's something people respect." For several seconds, she simply stared at me. Then she climbed into her car. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away slowly. She never looked back. The sun disappeared behind the maple trees a few minutes later. For the first time in 3 days. The driveway was empty. No moving trucks. No unfamiliar cars. No shouting. Only wind moving through branches I had planted as thin saplings 16 years earlier. Richard walked beside me to the front porch. He handed me a new set of keys. I had the locks changed this afternoon. I looked at him. While everyone was packing, I laughed quietly. You planned that. I've learned. He smiled. Closure should have a lock. I thanked him. He shook my hand once. If anyone contacts you, let me know. I will. And Michael. Yes. Don't spend tonight cleaning. I looked toward the front door. Why not? Spend tonight remembering why you built the place in the first place. With that, he walked to his car and drove away. I stepped inside. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. The hardwood floor still creaked in the same spot near the hallway. The kitchen window still caught the orange light of sunset. The staircase still carried the tiny scratch Emily's Christmas tree had left 12 years earlier. Some things survive conflict. Not because they are untouched. Because they were built well. I walked into the workshop. My father's toolbox sat exactly where I had left it after rescuing it from the garage. I opened it slowly. Every wrench, every screwdriver, every measuring square. Still there. On top lay a folded piece of paper I didn't remember placing there. I unfolded it. It was one of my original house sketches. Yellow with age. Covered in pencil notes. In the corner, written in my own handwriting from 16 years earlier, were 5 simple words. Build it to last forever. I smiled. Not because the house had survived. Because those words applied to far more than wood and concrete. Character. Integrity. Patience. Those were the foundations that had carried me through the last 3 days. And unlike walls, no one could throw those into the yard. The following Monday, I went back to work. That surprised a lot of people. Several co-workers assumed I would take a few days off. Instead, I arrived at the office at 6:42 in the morning, exactly as I had done for years. Routine has a quiet way of reminding you who you are after chaos tries to redefine you. By 7:30, I was reviewing inspection reports for a 78-year-old steel bridge scheduled for rehabilitation. Cracked expansion joints. Corroded bearings. Nothing emotional. Nothing personal. Just engineering. For the first time in days, my mind felt clear. Around 9, my supervisor, Greg Foster, stopped outside my office. You've got visitors. I looked up. Visitors. He smiled. 3 of them. When I walked into the conference room, I found the entire executive committee waiting. Our regional director stood first. Michael. I nodded. Morning. We've been discussing the Interstate 41 restoration project. I knew the project well. $423 million. 5 years of construction. More than 300 engineers involved. The largest infrastructure contract our company had ever received. We've made a decision. He slid a folder across the table. We'd like you to lead it. I looked at him without speaking. We considered several candidates. He smiled. You were the unanimous choice. Why me? Another executive answered before anyone else could. Because when everything around you becomes complicated. He paused. You have a reputation for making complicated things stable again. Those words stayed with me. Not because they praised my technical ability. Because they described the kind of man I had spent decades trying to become. News travels strangely in small communities. Within 2 weeks, nearly everyone on our street knew some version of what had happened. Most versions were wrong. Some claimed police had dragged people from the house. Others claimed there had been a screaming match lasting hours. One version even suggested I had secretly sold the property months earlier. Reality was much quieter. People often expect justice to sound loud. Sometimes it sounds like paper sliding across a table. About 3 weeks later, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Kevin stood there alone. No moving truck. No family. Just him. He looked older than I remembered. Not because time had passed. Because humility ages people differently than pride. I won't stay long. I stepped aside. He shook his head. I'd rather talk out here. I respected that. He looked around the porch before speaking. I've been angry for a long time. I waited. Not just about the house. He sighed. About everything. My divorce. My job. My money. My father. Myself. He laughed bitterly. When Mom said moving here would fix everything. I wanted to believe her. I nodded. I understand. No. He shook his head. I don't think you do. He looked directly at me. I knew it wasn't our house. Those words hung in the air. I convinced myself that if enough people agreed with Mom. He smiled sadly. Ownership would somehow become less important. It doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't. He reached into his jacket and handed me a small wooden box. My son found this behind a cabinet. Inside was an old brass compass. It had belonged to my grandfather. I had searched everywhere for it. I thought it was gone. So did I. He hesitated. I'm sorry. No dramatic speech. No excuses. Just 2 words. Sometimes 2 words carry more weight than 20 explanations. I accepted them. Thank you for bringing it back. He nodded once, then walked away. I never saw him again. Linda never apologized. Not directly. About 8 months later, I received a handwritten Christmas card. There was no return address. Only one sentence inside. I hope your house is warm this winter. No signature. None was necessary. I looked at the card for several minutes. Then placed it in a drawer. Not every relationship reaches reconciliation. Some